Well, thanks for having me. This is my first time doing an online webinar, so I hope everything goes good. Um, so here we go. This is a little bit of the outline of what I'm gonna talk about today. And I don't really know what this says, but um, basically, I'm going to talk about how I've kind of evolved my fertilizer practices in the last 6 or 7 years, and how I've got to where I am today, and why I think that is better. So I'm a golf course superintendent. I've been a superintendent for 11 years. I've been in the golf course industry for 17 years. Um, I also do search and rescue and rope rescue, and that's kind of a thing that I do in my spare time. And so that's a lot of fun. I have a family, and that takes a lot of my time and passion is with my family. And just recently, well, I mean, I've had a blog, turfhacker.com, since 2011, but in the last few years, I've been asked to talk at various conferences around the world. I've been in Ireland, Iceland, all over the United States, um, to kind of share some of my experience with precision turfgrass management and minimalism and integrated pest management things. So back, what kind of started it all was in 2010, we in Western Canada, where I'm located, we were threatened with a pesticide ban. And everybody that I knew, all of our associations, they were putting all of their efforts into fighting the ban. And nobody was putting any effort um, into strategies that we could use if we were banned. So I had this blog that I had originally used for golfers at my golf course that I found out that mostly superintendents were reading. Um, I decided to leverage that as a tool to learn and share what works and share what doesn't work, and hopefully that if we were banned, we would be able to still grow grass. Because at that time, I had no clue how to um, manage turf grass without lots of pesticide. Um, it turns out that we weren't banned, but we are facing continual restrictions similar to what is happening in Europe. For me, Twitter has been a huge a tool for me. Typically, we have one or two staff at my golf course. I'm the only person trained in turf grass, and so I don't have an assistant. But with Twitter, I have over 5,000 people that I can call on if I have a question. And and on Twitter was where I learned about people who embraced minimalism. So, I used to feel bad about our low budget and kind of small out of the way golf course. But on Twitter, I learned that there's a lot that I can be thankful for my course. And as you'll see in today's presentation, some of the stuff I do is pretty crazy, and some of the stuff I do is probably beyond what courses like, say, even Augusta would do. Um, so the sky is really the limit, and that's kind of what I learned on social media. So fertilizing has always been kind of confusing to me, and I'm not sure if the Matrix was a thing in Spain, but the movie The Matrix, where Neo, he kind of knows there's something up, and he's not totally sure what it is. And that's kind of how I felt with fertilizer. I would get a recommendation. I would do a soil test from grass that was perfect grass. And the recommendation would come back that I needed to add a whole bunch of fertilizer to avoid a disaster. And to me, that just didn't make sense. And then I would get these recommendations, I would follow them. So I would apply all this fertilizer, and I wouldn't notice any difference. There was no meaningful difference. And to me, that just didn't make sense. And that kind of was how, in the movie The Matrix, how I kind of felt. And I didn't know what was up until I came across on Twitter Micah Woods and Larry Stowell, and they kind of changed my perception of how fertilizer works, and really simplified it for me. And this was we had the recession in 2008, and this is a course next to mine, and they got hit particularly hard, and they actually for 2 or 3 years had no fertilizer. They had almost no budget, and the greens were great. I mean, to be honest, they were really good for a couple of years until all of a sudden they weren't. And on this picture here on the left, you can see following aerification. It's not the best picture, but what happened was the grass was turning brown and it was just stunted and it wasn't growing. And it happened quite suddenly. We didn't have money for soil testing at the time, or time for soil testing. So we just went out and we spread various fertilizers. In this picture in the middle, you can see how sunken the turf is in between the aerification holes. And so this was an application of gypsum we put on pretty heavily. And it turned out that that's what was wrong. And the soil test that came, a few weeks later confirmed that. But we applied gypsum to the greens and they got better. And there's a lot of people who can kind of confuse the interactions or try to complicate the interactions of fertilizer in the soil. And it's pretty simple. It's either you have enough or you don't. And in this case, we didn't have enough. We added some and the grass got better. So it was a very simple thing to fix. And, and we saw it coming. It wasn't like the greens died. It happened over a span of a few weeks. We're out on the course every day, and it was simple to fix. So back in 2012, I came across the MLSN guidelines, and to me, they instantly made sense because of my previous observations of the soil test not making sense, being able to just add enough fertilizer. So these are the numbers that they have come up with for macronutrients. For micronutrients, essentially, you usually will have enough in the soil for the plant needs. And if you are worried about it, adding a small amount every year for relatively low cost won't hurt. So the MLSN guidelines, they're kind of unique because they were made from real soil samples. So Larry Stowell, he's a consultant in Western United States, and he had thousands upon thousands of soil tests in his database from really good grass. And then Micah Woods, he wanted to use this data, and so they did, and they applied a statistical analysis to it, and were able to come up with some good numbers. And then over the years, they did a global soil survey, so some citizen science, where they asked other superintendents all over the world to participate, and I was one of them, and they further refined these numbers. And so these numbers, going back, these are the numbers you don't want to drop below. So if you are above this, you are okay for today. And these are the nutrient ratios that are essentially found in the plant, and most plants are the same. So we can apply these nutrients in this ratio. And nutrient uptake, so how nutrients are used in the plant is dependent on nitrogen. So this is a study by Cuso, Solat, Kreuzer, and Houlihan. And as nitrogen rate goes up, so does potassium and phosphorus, and it's all relative in this ratio of NPK is 8:1:4. So that's what the ratio for general maintenance would look like. So the MLSN is super simple. And a lot of people overcomplicate it because as you fertilize your grass is going to use nutrients. If you're at the MLSN today, you might not be tomorrow if you don't add that nutrient. So if you want to make it as simple as possible, if you are lower than the MLSN, add the nitrogen and potassium in a 1:2 ratio. So that will bring your potassium up because you're applying more potassium than the plant will use. If you have the right amount of potassium in your soil, you can apply it in a 2:1 ratio. And then what I do is I just soil test every year. And if you have way too much potassium, you can apply it in a 2:0. So then that will allow you to use your potassium that's in the soil. And then once you get down to the MLSN level, you're going to start applying it again. So this is, I mean, in essence, this is as simple as it gets. It really isn't that complicated. Now, a lot of the stuff that I'm about to talk to you about is just my way of overcomplicating things, and it's simply based on curiosity. I'm a very curious person, and maybe I've done a disservice to the MLSN by kind of overcomplicating it. But in the end, this is it. This is how it works. It's very simple. So this is my fertilizer shed. And like I said, I wanted to have a little bit more precision. I had some ideas about excess nutrients, so I wanted to get the levels right down to the MLSN guideline. And one of the things about proving something right is you got to prove it wrong. So if I have my soil levels down at the MLSN guidelines and my grass dies because of a nutrient deficiency, then the MLSN guideline is wrong. And I wanted to find out if the MLSN guideline was wrong as soon as possible. I didn't want to, do it for 10 years and then decide that, that doesn't work. So the way for me to do that was to use soluble fertilizer, so agricultural grade fertilizer. So we have urea, a little bit of iron, some potassium sulfate. This is K-Mag, and a little bit of gypsum and lime. And this is the fertilizer I had last year for my entire 9-hole golf course. We only used about half of it. And so we're really precise about the way we apply nutrients. And I think there's all of the potassium for our entire golf course. And as you'll see with some of the charts coming up, you'll see where those savings come from. So, year one, so 2012, this is the amount of time I spent fertilizing the golf course. There was a big spike, and that was a learning curve for me using those agricultural grade fertilizers. And I also had a really bad sprayer. My sprayer was a little pull behind, 200-liter sprayer, really small. So then in 2013, we upgraded and we got a state-of-the-art modern sprayer. And that was actually paid for by the fertilizer savings. And the return on investment was about 2 years. That machine paid for itself. The amount of fertilizer that we've applied on the golf course has changed drastically. So I found records going back to the late 1980s, and you see these huge spikes, and there's just nothing resembling consistency. And this is one of those reasons that the fertilizer recommendations really didn't make sense. If they made sense, if these recommendations had any backing in science, you would probably find some consistency eventually, but that's not what I was seeing. And it's another interesting thing to note here is the amount of fertilizer applied on greens back in the early 90s was more than we apply to our entire course now. And as you see on the right here, the line is less spiky and it's a lot more consistent. And that's something that the MLSN is going to achieve for you. There won't be these surprise big applications. And then costs. So we never really spent that much money on fertilizer to begin with, with a budget high. I think before this time we were spending upwards of $15,000. So this is 9 holes of for a golf course. Yeah, and last year we spent about $600 on fertilizer. And so that's been a big help, and that's allowed us to spend money elsewhere in new equipment. So we have a very modern equipment fleet, new golf cart fleet, wetting agents, and then upgrading our irrigation system. So instead of growing grass, now we're spending our money where we should be. So this is kind of the change that MLSN has brought over time. So the biggest savings was on fairways, because they're the biggest part of our golf course, and they are on native soil. And the native soil has a high nutrient holding capacity. So you can see here, I didn't test the soil, or I'd already bought the fertilizer in 2012. But in 2013, after I tested my fairways, it showed that I had more than enough. And I recently tested my fairways after applying only nitrogen for 5 years. And I still have decades worth of nutrients in my soil from years and years of over application. So basically, I'm just using just a small amount of nitrogen on my fairways, and that's it. And to be honest, the fairways have never been better. So that's where the majority of the cost savings is from not applying these nutrients on our soil-based fairways. On a sand-based fairway, it's not gonna be the same as that. These levels will drop very quickly on a sand-based fairway. Our greens, again, we're applying a lot less nutrient, but you can see here in 2012 when I did the MLSN, I didn't apply much. And then 2013, I had to apply a bunch more. And that's because they're sand-based, and those nutrient levels will fluctuate very drastically on a sand-based, low cation exchange capacity soil. And then so what has happened since then, and as I've learned about the MLSN and how to refine things, is it's gotten more consistent as time goes on. And that's a good thing. I mean, we don't want to have any surprises, and there shouldn't be any surprises for fertilizer. So there is a math equation that Micah has talked about, how to figure out this. I'm not going to go into that today because it's pretty boring, and it's something that you can spend some time with later. I have done the math, a math tutorial on my blog, turfhacker.com, and maybe I'll show that at the end of the talk, where I go step by step for how to calculate, if you want to get super precise about how much nutrient to apply, how to do that. So this isn't really a talk about math, but just so that you know, the math is available if you want to get super precise. But to me, the MLSN it's boring. It's not interesting. It's very easy to understand and to fine tune. And once you get your head around how it works, it's not that interesting. Make sure that your plant has enough nutrient, and if it doesn't, add the nutrient. And that's as simple as it gets. There's no balancing or ratios or any magic. It's just very simple. To me, nitrogen is the important. That's what makes the grass grow. That's what determines how much of the other nutrients are going to be used. So when I first started as a superintendent 11 years ago, this was kind of how we would do fertilizer. General recommendations, nothing too specific, nothing really that specific to any climate in particular. Just, this is how much you apply, how much nitrogen per month. Now this is in kilograms, in pounds per thousand, or in kilograms per 100. And they would just give these generalized recommendations, and that's kind of what I did. And for the most part, we had pretty good grass, but we had some problems with excessive growth. This wasn't very precise. We've probably all seen this picture of how cool season turf. So I'm talking mostly about cool season turf because that's what I have experience with. But we see this with this big growth surge in the spring. In the summer, the growth slows, and in the fall, we get another surge again. Now this is very true in climates like Northern California. I would probably expect it's true in climates such as Spain, where cool season grasses are grown. But for me, I'm in a northern climate similar to the United Kingdom or Scotland, and that's not how grass grows in my climate. But this is how I was told it was grown, and this is how we used to fertilize. And so this chart here is the growth potential. And this was another mind-blowing thing that from Pace Turf that was a way to show me how my grass grew in my specific climate. So this is in Northern California. And you can see the cool season grass does in fact peak in the spring and in the fall, and it does decline in the summer. And then the warm season grasses, it doesn't do very well except for a brief period in the summer. It'll kind of grow a little bit, but this isn't a place where you would want to grow warm season grass because it would be too short of a time. So this is kind of, I'm near Vancouver, British Columbia, and this is how grass grows in my climate. So we have no growth for warm season grasses. And when I first saw this curve, it was mind blowing because it showed me how my grass, it kind of confirmed to me my observations. I wasn't led to, I wasn't trying to make grass grow more in the spring and the fall anymore. And I could kind of understand what was happening with my grass. And this actually, as you'll see, helped explain a lot of the problems I was having. And one of the cool things is starting in 2011, I was measuring clipping yield, and that's kind of where this talk is going to go. And the reason why I had these observations about how my grass grew is because I was measuring clipping yield. And as you can see from the last few years, this is in fact how the grass grows in my climate. And this is pretty interesting, or it was pretty interesting to me, and it's a very useful thing, I think, to measure, is how much does your grass grow, and when. And then this, so I'm not sure if this is going to work. No, these charts aren't going to work. These were going to show an animation of the changes in fertilizer over the years, but for some reason they don't want to work. So we'll just skip through it. It just shows that I'm applying less and less over the years, and it's not that important. So a great way to do this is on Pace Turf on their website. They have a climate appraisal form, and you can fill in your temperatures over the year, and this will give you the growth potential. So this is a percentage for the year for warm and cool season grass. It'll tell you how much nitrogen you can expect to use, and then you can plug in your soil test data, and then it'll tell you how much fertilizer you need to apply. As you can see here, phosphorus, I have a 6.6 year supply of phosphorus in my greens, magnesium 4.5 years, and then iron, 775 years of plant growth before we deplete that iron. So we don't need to apply iron for plant health or for plant growth needs. We still do apply iron for color, etc. So that that number is going to keep going up. And then you can see here where we need to apply some calcium and we need to apply some potassium because we don't have enough in the soils. So,
Jason.
Yeah.
Jason. Sorry. Just one question of Xavier Miet, one attendee. He's asking if about nitrogen fertilization, if it's in some point is it considering the nitrogen input coming from the rain?
Yeah, so this method of doing it is a lot better than what I was doing based on that first table I showed, but this still has a lot of flaws because it doesn't take into account what is actually happening on your golf course. So that's where clipping yield is going to come into account. So that's kind of a perfect segue because that's exactly where I'm going now, is looking at how can we refine this, because this is a big step up from just kind of applying a rate depending on the date. Now this kind of times it for your climate. So the next step is how can we account for all those other unknowns, because there's so many unknowns of nutrient being applied to your course. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
And I think we'll hopefully it'll become a little bit more clear here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this is kind of just going back to a few of the questions that I had about excess nutrients. So we're stepping away a little bit from nitrogen. So this is the park grass experiment. It's the oldest grass experiment in the world. It's over 150 years going. Um, and what it was is just a pasture, and they applied different fertilizers, different nutrients to each of these plots. And one of the cool things that they noticed early on was that the plots looked as though they had been planted with different types of plants um, they weren't. They all started off the same. And so the type of fertilizer had an impact on the type of plants that would grow in each plot. And this is tremendously useful for people who are trying to grow any plant really is to apply the type of fertilizer that will that your specific plant needs. And in the case there, what they found is that plots that received only nitrogen had only grass, and they had less biodiversity, so less weeds than the other plots. So this is something, I mean, as someone who is trying to find ways to reduce pesticide use, this was tremendously useful for me. On our tee boxes, which are sand-based, they used to have lots of clover, like a lot of clover, to a point where we would have to spray because it would take over the entire plots. Well, we stopped applying calcium because on our tees we didn't need calcium, and potassium. We stopped that as well because they had enough. And I was shocked. Within a year, we had no clover. Now on my fairways, where I've only applied um, nitrogen for the last 5 years, they're soil based, so they still have lots of nutrients for the weeds to grow and kind of invade. So we still have lots of clover on our fairways, and it's going to take years and years for us to get to a point where where we're closer to those MLSN guidelines where the weeds will probably disappear. But this was kind of it felt almost too good to be true. Here's another just picture of the tee boxes. We have almost no weeds, and we can easily hand pick during the year. Another really interesting thing, and this is another huge benefit of being on Twitter, is I can follow the turfgrass scientists, and you can see their research in real time, and then you can ask them questions, and then you can even inspire them to do further research. So this is Doug Soldat, and he's doing a test where they were just not applying potassium or different rates of potassium. And the plot on the right here had no potassium, and they didn't apply a snow mold or a winter fungicide. And as the snow melted in the spring, the plots that had no potassium had almost no disease. So this has huge implications for areas with snow cover or with winter diseases. So excess potassium was making disease worse. And we're often super concerned about nutrient deficiencies, but it seems as though nobody is concerned about nutrient excess. And this picture and the picture I just showed with the no weeds on our tee boxes are kind of show how nutrient excess can actually cause us problems. So it's one of the reasons why I think that getting your nutrient levels down to those MLSN levels and keeping them there might be beneficial than just simply staying above them. And as time goes on, researchers are doing more work to find out better information to more fine tune those MLSN levels, or come up with new guidelines that are even more precise for your type of grass, even. Because personally, bent grass will grow at much lower nutrient levels than, we'll say, POA. So what is the difference, and how can we use that? So that's kind of exciting and something to look forward to. So this was another cool Paul Kosh from the University of Wisconsin. He showed this picture on Twitter, and this plot here that has no disease, the only difference is it has a high rate of nitrogen applied. And this has 0.6 pounds every 2 weeks, and this has 0.4 pounds per every 2 weeks. So it's not that big of a difference in fertilizer. There's a huge difference in disease. And again, as somebody who's trying to use less pesticides, this is very interesting. And then it was even more interesting because when I used to fertilize like this with the more fertilizer in the spring and not much in the summer, so we were essentially not applying enough nitrogen in the summertime, and that would make our disease worse. Now what I do is I apply the majority of my fertilizer in the summertime, and that has significantly reduced the need for fungicide. I've only need to spray for dollar spot once or twice in the last 5 years, where it used to be like 2 to 3 times a year. Um, so we've been pretty successful just by switching the timing and optimizing the timing of nitrogen. Um, and that's helped big time with this disease. So basically, that's kind of the overview, and then next we kind of get into fine tuning it a bit more. Um, so again, I mean, this is a repeat. It's a little bit I think out of order, but we've already talked about this and that. So how do I do it? I mean, doing the math every time is a little bit complicated, especially for growth potential. This is the formula I have in Excel, just so you know, and if you want to take a screenshot of that. But again, all of this is available on my blog and on Paste Turf's website for free, so you can find these things. So what I would do in the past is kind of look at the temperatures for the upcoming week. I would plug them into this formula, and it would spit out for me how much fertilizer I need to throw in my tank. So it makes this process, all this math, very, very easy. So this is how I can really fine tune my nitrogen applications based on the real weather that's upcoming. And then this is, oops. This is a kind of a squish table, but again, I'll show it again. This is the growth rates. So as I over time, and as we cut greens, we measure the clippings, and then that would tell me how fast my grass is growing. And then this here is kind of taking what we measure, and with those nutrients that we and I apologize, the slide is kind of the picture here is a little bit squished, so it's hard to read. But again, all of this you'll be able to see this for yourself on some tables after I'm done my presentation. I take how much nutrient we've applied, because we can correlate clipping volume to the mass of the clippings, and this will allow us to determine how much nitrogen we've removed from the system. I can compare that to the growth potential, and then basically apply the difference. So this is kind of an experimental thing, something I've been playing with.
Sorry, Jason, there is another question. Okay. Jason?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. There's another question. Let me read for you.
Okay.
How do you follow the growth potential if you use the nitrogen as a fungicide? Are you not over fertilizing?
No, I mean, I thought I was, but it turns out that in my climate during the summer, the grass will need that much to grow. But again, this is still kind of crude. It's not super precise because I'm not really taking reality into. I mean, this is kind of starting to take reality into account. And to be honest, this is a little bit probably more complicated than anybody really wants to do. But it's me trying to figure out what's happening, and how can we refine this, and how can we make this something that other people can do easily. But I thought, I used to think that I was over applying, but again, I'm not. I mean, those rates, that 0.6 pounds every 2 weeks, that's way higher than I apply. But that's because I'm in a different climate, and there's a whole bunch of other factors. But that could be a talk in among itself, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So in my travels, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people and share my ideas about how we can grow grass better. Um, and this has offered me a huge opportunity to kind of learn more about and have lots of questions asked and kind of um, and think about it differently. And while I was in Minnesota this winter, it kind of hit me, and it's so why do we fertilize our grass? And like why? It's a very simple question, but it's just something that needs to be answered. Um, and it's to make it grow faster, right? We want the grass to grow faster. If the grass is growing too fast, it doesn't need fertilizer. Um, it's specifically nitrogen fertilizer. So it's a very simple question, but how fast is the grass growing? And I hope I'm timing this. I'm not exactly sure what my slides say here. So, um, but in order to refine things, we need to know how fast our grass is growing and how fast we want it to grow. Um, and if we're going to use fertilizer to adjust the growth rates, it just makes sense that we need to know these things. Um, Last winter, I had half of my greens die due to ice encasement. We had a really bad winter. And this, I mean, while unfortunate, it was a fantastic opportunity for me to learn. Um, and what we had done, obviously, the greens that were damaged, we reseeded them and we gave them a higher amount of fertilizer. So half of my greens had received a huge amount of fertilizer, and the other half had received just the normal maintenance amount of fertilizer, nothing to recover from any damage because they weren't damaged. Um, and so this variation in growth rate was super interesting. So I come out onto the golf course one morning and the disease. So this is Microdocium navale, or pink snow mold. Probably, I'm not sure if it's an issue in Spain, but it certainly is up north. Um, and it was really, really bad, but only on a few greens. And typically my first green has the worst disease, but my first green had no disease. But my third green, if you look over here, was the one that had the worst disease. And these are the growth rates. So the greens that were growing the fastest had more of this disease. And so there was a huge difference, a huge, and then so anything that was around 2 liters per 100 square meters per day, that was had no disease, and the correlation was perfect among greens. It was shocking. Now this is a disease that happens in the cool times of the year, and so this is starting to teach me that it's not about necessarily about the amount of fertilizer. It's more about the growth rate, and it's more precisely it's the growth rate relative to the weather. So when it's cool, the growth rate should be lower. When it's warm, the growth rate should be higher. And it's trying to find that optimum growth rate. Um, and 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 that optimum growth rate can have what I've seen an impact on diseases like dollar spot or microdocium. And so this was super interesting to me, anyways, to try and to optimize growth rates for disease, because again, I'm trying to use less pesticide. And it turns out that a bit on the greens last spring that weren't damaged, they didn't need any fungicide until September, which was something I'd never done before, and it was simply just by growing the grass at an appropriate rate. Here's another example. This is my course, my sprayer on the right here. The boom stops right here for fertilizer, and so this side here of the collar, it gets much less fertilizer, and you can see the dollar spot is way worse. And again, this was something I could correlate the disease pressure on my greens to growth rate. So the greens that were growing too slow, or parts of the course that were growing too slow in the summer, had much worse disease. And I mean, just looking at this picture, you can't really tell the difference in growth rate. The only way to know how fast the grass is growing is to measure it. So then I've come up with some of these thresholds, the growth rates for fusarium, or this is microdocium. You don't want to grow it over 1.5 liters per day, per 100 square meters per day. um, during the times of the year when that is active. And then dollar spot, you want to grow it at least 2 liters. So you want to keep the grass growing fast when dollar spot is an issue. Now these are just crude numbers. These are things I just made up based on my observations. I know that there are certain scientists out there that are going to be kind of working on this stuff to get a better idea. Because again, there's a lot of things that grow into growth rate. It's not just fertilizer. It's the irrigation, water, organic matter in the soil. So I think that's why clipping yield, something that we can measure quite easily, tells us a better picture and can help us refine things a bit better. So how do I measure it? It's very simple. We just have a bucket with measuring lines, and we hang it on our greens mower. And every time we cut the greens, we dump our grass. Instead of dumping it on the ground or into the back of a machine, we just dump it into the pail and we write down the number. And it's as simple as that. It takes 20 seconds per green to measure this information. Very simple to do. And all it takes is a bucket with some lines on the side. Now, I've also on my blog, which I'll show later, have a free spreadsheet that you can download and try to get to work for measuring clipping yield, and it will do all this analysis for you. So again, I only have 9 or 11 greens because we have 2 practice greens, but we measure the area. We use the size of the greens to calculate the liters per 100 square meters. This will tell us how much the grass is growing. And then this coefficient of variation is basically how consistent is the number. And Micah Woods, he suggests that anything below 33% is considered really good consistency from one green to another. And I was surprised actually when I started measuring individual greens how inconsistent they were. You can see on the side here the coefficient of variation. It was quite inconsistent. And so what I started doing is fertilizing greens individually based on their growth rates. So each green would get a specific amount of nitrogen. And I was able to get those coefficient of variation quite low and get very consistent. You can see here this very consistent growth rates across the entire course by only applying fertilizer to greens that needed it. And the greens that were growing too fast, I would just not fertilize. So this is the growth rate, the blue line, and then the consistency. So you can see over the summer, as I start measuring and adjusting, the consistency is getting more consistent. And then the growth rate, when you look at it like this, there's these huge spikes here and here. So this is really interesting because this is in August. In August, I applied almost no fertilizer, but we had this huge spike of growth. And what had happened is this is organic matter in the soil releasing nutrients. So all of a sudden, because I know how much fertilizer I've applied and I know how fast the grass is growing, now we can account for organic matter in the soil. And organic matter in the soil is a big problem because, I mean, it does result in these growth spikes, but it also results in the need for aerifying. And pulling cores and verticutting and top dressing, very expensive, disruptive practices. And they're a result of basically too much organic matter. But if we can measure how much the grass is growing and not fertilize when the organic matter is being released due to the microbial activity in the soil, mineralizing the nutrients, now we're going to be using up that organic matter instead of adding to it. So if I was fertilizing during this period, we would be adding to the organic matter in theory. I mean, this is just a theory of mine. But it only makes sense that if the grass is growing faster than you don't need to fertilize it. So again, we can with some math, it's not super precise, but with some math we can determine how much nitrogen we've removed, we can determine how much we've applied, and then we can determine the difference. So are we adding to the organic matter or are we using the organic matter? And a negative number suggests that we are using organic matter up. So that the more negative is, the more organic matter is being used. And so this is how we can really fine tune, because a lot of us have greens that are different. There's some sand, some soil. There's quite a variety, and this will help fine tune those growths. Again, this is probably more complicated than most people um, want to do, but for me, I'm curious about it, and it's certainly worth trying. Um, so that's the last of the slides. And what I'm about, I'll just show a couple of websites and just a couple of the real data updated things that I am currently doing. So on my blog, Turf Hacker, you can go to it, and there's Jason's productivity files. You can go here, and I've shared all of my things. So we have a stimp meter, but here's the clipping yield sheet. So you can go here, and then you can just go File, make a copy, and then it's yours. And then you can have all of that information that I showed, to collect that kind of data. And then this here is my maintenance heads up display. So this particular spreadsheet I don't have available for free because it's a little bit tricky to set up. But just to show you how it can be, all this data can be used. Here on the right, we have growth rates, and this is this actual data from this year. So this is the overall growth rate, and we can see the trend over the year. And then this is the growth rate, clipping yield, and then I have my disease targets. So the red columns are the growth rate, so how fast the grass is growing per green. And you can see there's a bit of a difference. My first green isn't growing. What's going on there? And then so for diseases such as microdochium, we don't want these red columns to go above this red line. So this now is kind of what I'm using to fertilize. Is I don't want to see any spikes in that, because I think we might see disease issues. And then once dollar spot becomes an issue, we'll want these red lines to be over this green line, so we'll want to be up high. So that's just an interesting way of looking at it, and a way to make better decisions. And then this here is calculating the nitrogen used. So is there a question?
Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Yes, another question. Is the organic matter nutrient release associated with rain, with temperature?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what is associated with it. All I know is that the grass is growing faster than I want it to, and I don't need to apply fertilizer. So yeah, a lot of the time it's like in August there, we would get a rain, and we would get, some cooler overnight temperatures. And then, we've all seen that, and then the growth just goes crazy. And so once we measure that, we can adjust our fertilizer practices to accommodate those big growth rates that we don't want, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And I'm just about done, and then we can go to more questions. And then so this just shows the different the amount of nutrients I've removed. So the red column here is how much nutrient or nitrogen I've removed from each green, based on the clipping yield, and then this kind of orange beige line is how much fertilizer. So I've very little. We haven't even applied 1 gram per square meter of nitrogen yet this season. But every time we mow, this little line will go up slightly, and then again. Down here is the live chart, which will track clipping yield on a monthly basis. And there's a whole bunch of other really neat stuff that we can do with. Here's the growth potential, so we can see how our growing conditions are, and use this to make fertilizer recommendations. So that's pretty interesting to me, anyways. And then just a quick aside, to collect this data, to make it easy, I just have a website with all of our Google Forms, and this is the form. My staff can load this on their computer or on their phone, and they can add this data in the field, and then Then there's no transcribing, paper notes into the computer, because that's a lot of work. And I'm lazy and I don't like to have to do anything extra. So I'll just do a quick example here. Let's say we got 2 liters on the fourth green. We'll hit submit, and anybody here could have done that, and my staff could have done that, and we'll just see here. It's going to update. It might take a minute. Um, there. So now we can see hole 4. There's the latest growth rate, and everything else. So, but yeah, that's just a number I made up. So I'll have to go and delete that. But you can just see how it instantly adds data to the thing. And you can see here, hole 4 has now the fertilizer amount removed has jumped. Um, so this is incredibly useful. It's not perfect, but it's a good way to visualize nitrogen applied versus nutrient removed. And I don't think we're ever going to get 100% efficiency out of our fertilizers, but we're going to get pretty close. So I think that's about it. I think the main thing is just to go out there, if you're curious with clipping yields, measure the clipping yields and see if the information is useful to you, because I know I've found it incredibly useful. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Sorry, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, because I've been speaking for the last 2 minutes.
Okay.
Muted. I saw that you didn't change your face,
Yeah, I'm like,
and I was thinking, well, he's a quiet man.
yeah,
But
no.
right now I realized that I was muted. So sorry, because I
Yeah.
was speaking for myself.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so let me repeat what I was saying. That I thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was saying for myself that, and right now for everybody, that I think that your work is special because you share your experience and all the huge amount of things that you do with all colleagues of tour managers and this around the world. So I think that it makes you very special because it's not usual. So for
Yeah,
me,
yeah. It's I mean, selfish intentions. I mean, it's so that I can learn from other people. But yeah, I mean, it isn't usual for people to share that
yes.
kind of
So
stuff.
thank you. So
Yeah.
okay, there is another question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, mira, have you checked the difference of variation of the growth potential in between mounds and clipping yields?
The difference in variation between.
The difference of the difference of variation of the growth potential uh, between mounds and clipping yield. among the
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's kind of what that one chart. I mean, I can load it up here. Here it is. Kind of what this sort of does. No, there it is. This kind of what this one does. This will take the growth potential and then compare clipping yield to that. And it's usually pretty close. I mean, we're looking pretty small amounts here, like a tenth of a gram difference. But again, I can adjust it. It's all about how fast you want your grass to grow, and every course is going to be different. Some courses that have more traffic than me are going to have to grow their grass faster or essentially apply more nutrient to grow their grass faster to put up with that traffic.
Okay, perfect.
But there are, I mean, part of one of the problems is, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so for me to do like really meaningful research is hard. I can make basic observations and share those with the scientists, and so now the scientists are going to do this comparison, and I mean, there's so much we don't know about something as simple as nitrogen fertilization and the timing of that. And so I mean, that's one of the things that is just starting to, well, I mean, there has been some work, but there's more work being done on it now because it's very interesting, and it has a huge implication for our operations.
Okay, yeah, you're right, but I think that in this case, you like Micah Butch or Larry Stowell,
Yeah,
what we are working, what you are working is in questioning things.
yeah, and just, I
I
mean,
think that's the key.
trying to refine things, and I mean, to me it makes sense. You know, mowing grass costs money. I don't want to have to spend money if I don't have to. I want to make more money. Um, and just, one kind of just figure, we've reduced mowing by 40% since we've done this. So 40% less labor, 40% less fuel, um, and 80% less fertilizer. And our machines last twice as long. Um, less maintenance. So it's been growing the grass as slow as possible for your operation based on the amount of traffic you have can save you a lot of money.
Okay, because one question, you didn't talk about plant growth regulator.
Yeah, so I used to use things like Primo Max.
Yeah,
Um, I stopped last year just because some people had suggested that it would give Poa annua an advantage. And as someone who is trying to promote bent grass, I'm not really sure what to think about it. But either way, I mean, if we go back to here um, on this chart, in 2016, I was using plant growth regulators. 2017, I wasn't. And this difference, this variation here, has more to do with I was applying way more fertilizer in the
yeah.
spring, so we got a little bit of a surge, but there wasn't any difference. Um, if,
Okay,
if you are if you are using fertilizer to control growth rates, I don't see a need for plant growth regulators.
okay, yes, you're right. Okay, I will try. There's a lot of job to do. Okay, well, there is that was the last question.
Okay.
Again, thank you very much, Jason. I think that it's really interesting,
Yep.
and I'm gonna try this year to control the clipping yield and
I mean, I mean, it's one of those things. It's still new. It's not an exact science, and it's just interesting to
yes,
measure and see what you can do with it. So,
yes. Okay, so let me say goodbye to it in Spanish.
okay.
Ok. Pues nada, espero que os haya parecido interesante. Yo creo que es súper interesante el tema y queda para unas cuantas charlas más. Pero bueno, en este caso Jason pues, ha compartido su experiencia y creo que es formidable el trabajo que está haciendo. Por mi parte, nada más. Recuerdo que el 3 de mayo tenemos otro webinar que es una segunda charla que ofrecemos sobre bioestimulantes, que la da el doctor Andy Owen. Y bueno, dará un poquito otro enfoque del uso de bioestimulantes en base más a estudios científicos que ha estado realizando, pues será otro enfoque que nos dio José Ángel Sánchez Alcalá, que también fue súper interesante. Pues por mi parte no mucha nada más. Okay, Jason, thank you very much. And if anybody is interested in contact with you, yeah, well, they know your right now your blog, so
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bueno, bye.